Alright guys, welcome to the next session, session 11, BSBFLM309, Support Continuous Improvement Systems and Processes. Hopefully the last one worked well. Just going to do pretty much the same format again, so I'll go over the content, basically just hit on the key themes, pull out the activities as we go through them, talk about responses and expectations around responses, and then wrap it up from there. So hopefully, I'm looking, the last one was a little bit over an hour, I'm looking to get this one, just see if I can get a bit better at timing and get it under an hour, because I know that an hour is a long time watching a video, especially listening to me. So let's get into it. I really like this unit actually. This is one of my favorite units in the whole program, and it spans across all levels. So it's something that is consistent across all the levels of management. It does come from the management package. Continuous improvement is this idea that that a job is never 100% right, because consistently things change. But we'll talk about that as we go through. So there's three particular outcomes in this unit. Contribute to continuous improvement systems and processes. There are best practices in terms of how we can do continuous improvement, so that's about making sure that we can tap into that. Monitor and report specific outcomes, making sure that we are able to track, and there's a big emphasis on data, able to track the data of our improvements and then being able to see whether that's an improvement or not, and then report accordingly. And finally, being able to find opportunities for further improvement. And I just want to start off by making this point, because this is a really important point. Change is any alteration to the status quo. So change is any shift from what we're currently doing. And I'll just talk in a workplace context. So if you think about, we have a particular team of 5 people, and one of those people is going to be moved to another site, and we're going to get a replacement. That's a change. That person that is leaving could be a really strong team member, strong contributor, and the person that we get might not. So that change might be just not very good. Or the person who's leaving might not be someone who's so good, and the person coming might be someone who's pretty awesome, and that change is good. So change in itself doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means that there's an alteration. Innovation. Innovation, which is something that we talk about quite a bit, and it is probably the evolution of this idea of continuous improvement. Innovation is the idea that we are able to enhance an existing product, an existing process, or an existing service. So change is any alteration to the status quo. Innovation is where we've done something that actually enhances what we're doing. So if you think about a process, we can enhance a process by removing a step or two and still gets in the same outcome. That is innovation, because we can do it faster. We could probably do it cheaper because there's less time involved and so forth. So that's an innovation. Or it might be the end product, or it might be the actual quality of the service that we're delivering. And I want to use the mobile phone as an example, and in particular the smartphone. The idea of continuous improvement is best illustrated by looking at the iPhone. If you have a look at the iPhone 1 versus, in this diagram, the iPhone X, and if you own an iPhone or any smartphone, you know that the evolution hasn't been revolutionary. It's just been continual tweaks. And sometimes, people can be both critical or complimentary of it, but the idea is that if from iPhone 1 to iPhone 3 there were some tweaks, from iPhone 3 to iPhone 4 there were some tweaks, and so forth. And it's all about giving it better cameras, giving it faster processing, giving it more memory, all these little tweaks which have made it responsive. And then if we were to actually compare the iPhone 1 with the iPhone X, there would be quite a significant difference in capability and durability and so forth. I know some of you guys might argue that, but generally speaking, there would be a significant change from one to the other. So it's a bit of that slow a slow simmer, this idea of continuous improvement, rather than a revolution. And that's how most of the gains are made in the workplace. Is not scrapping a whole process and go, oh, that process is not quite doing it anymore, so let's scrap it and go to the drawing board. It's more about, let's break it down and see if we can actually enhance it to make it better. And this is all on the basis of what Darwin was saying. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, or the most smartest or intelligent of the species that survives. It's the one that's most responsive to change. So we have change. Change comes from technology. So new technology means that we no longer want to be paper-based. We want everything to be digital, so we can store. It's easier to store. It's easier to retrieve. It's easier to back up. Or it might be, our members of the public no longer want us to use these type of chemicals because of the health risks. They want us to use other chemicals which are not so dangerous. Or so there's all these. Or legislation, law around environmental protection, and so forth. All these changes around us require us to be responsive. And in business, in the private sector, the businesses that survive aren't the ones that necessarily provide the best product or service, but it's the ones that are most responsive to their clients' needs. And this is the idea of continuous improvement. Is there's not some kind of holy grail at the end that we're once we get it, it's that's it, we can relax and retire forever. It's like, yeah, you might do the job, you might make some changes and go, yeah, that's pretty good for now, but that's going to become superseded really quickly, and now faster than ever. So continuous improvement is important because it helps us to become more efficient and effective at what we do. It helps to bring new opportunities into the organization. So that means, sometimes continuous improvement for an organization can mean new products, new services, greater profitability if we can do it faster. It can bring in new clients or end users. It can bring in new work. But it's also new opportunities for us, because it means we have a new opportunity to develop our skills. And often that can mean, career development, greater responsibilities if you seek that, and so forth. It also provides better outcomes or greater opportunities for our clients, because they're getting a better product or a service or a process. But even things like the second last point, continuous improvement is really important because it just breaks the monotony. Yeah, we some of us, and I'm one of those people, love routine. I'm very much a routines driven person, but I get bored really quickly within that routine if it's always the same. So if my job was just to tighten a nut on a tire of a car every day, you would say, come on Tony, why are you complaining? That's great routine work. But I'd say, yeah, it's routine, but it's bloody boring. It's monotonous. So, it might be that I like working with tires, but maybe, I can be more innovative and look at ways of evolving my job so I can be better at doing that. So it's not monotonous, and I'm just not like in an infinite loop of doing the same thing all the time. And of course, it makes us more valuable. And especially if, and I'm talking from a personal perspective here, especially if you're my generation, we're now starting to get towards the end of the age of the workforce. You don't want to be seen as an old dinosaur who can't change. I continuous improvement is great for me because it challenges me. It means that I can become adaptive, I can become agile, be flexible, and really, engage and be part of especially new technologies that are evolving, such as what we're doing here, for example. Situations change. The environment has changed. We've had to adapt and evolve in the way that we're delivering this program. So, case in point. All right, let's have a look at the first activity. So the first activity is a group flipchart activity. Of course, unless you're in the same room with someone else, it's not going to be possible. So I'll get you just to work on this activity individually, and just brainstorm on that first activity as much as you can. Think about a significant change, or it doesn't have to be significant, just a change, and you can even use this program as an example of that. The change that occurred in this program, or a change that occurred in your workplace, recently, and just think about breaking down some of these things we talked about. What was the change? Would you describe it as an improvement? Why not? Were you consulted? What were the benefits? Were they even communicated to you? Use those as a loose guide. It's a brainstorming activity, so you don't necessarily have to address everyone specifically, but more just about getting your head in the right space in terms of thinking about continuous improvement in a recent example. Now, there's a couple really important things around continuous improvement, and the first important pillar around continuous improvement is making sure that people participate. That's us, that we participate in the continuous improvement process. So how can organizations encourage us, and how can we encourage others, be our colleagues or team members? There's a number of ways that we can do that, and number one, of course, is going back to some of our previous units around communication mechanisms. Team meetings, one-on-one discussions, consultations, asking for people's opinions, things like whiteboards even, or suggestion boards. Those type of things can be really great in terms of encouraging, but you have to ask. You have to say to people, we're always looking for ways to improve. Do you have any ideas? I'm currently struggling with this particular task. Have you got any suggestions on how we can do it better, or any idea how we can do it better? And we all play a role in that. You don't have to be a manager or a team leader or a supervisor to do that. Everybody plays a leadership role, as we've talked about. So employees are the best place to identify issues and problems and think about improvement ideas. If I'm doing the task, I am I'm probably the best person to ask about how I can make an impact. What are the challenges of that task? What are the things that you feel inefficient? What do you think are better ways to do that? So I need people to draw those suggestions out of me, and I need to participate in making those suggestions, because I'm the person who's accountable and responsible for that task. So my feedback and input should be farmed for those ideas. So leaders should encourage us as team members to bounce and test ideas off them and off each other. So there's this idea of consistently, and we talked about this with the conflict unit. This idea of throwing ideas out there so that we get rigorous, respectful discussion, so that then we can fine tune it to come up with something that's a little bit more looks more like the end product. In addition, when employees make suggestions and are heard, their commitment to the organization and to the achievement of organizational objectives will increase. And I know that from my own experience. Like when I'm asked, my ideas permeate my work, and I feel like I'm engaged with that, then I feel more connected with my job and with the organization and with my manager. If I don't, I become really detached. Then it just becomes a job, and then when it just becomes a job, you only ever do what you only have to do. You don't ever go any more than that, and you just don't. Your soul is not embedded in what you're doing. So what are some of the ways that we can encourage ideas? Well, some of the bigger organizations, if we look at some of those progressive organizations that always are spruiking innovation, one of the things that they do is they like to try and always make their organizations flatter. And what's that mean? So there's less levels of management, and it's a really good idea, because there's nothing more frustrating than coming up with an idea and then you've got to pass it up to your manager, and your manager, if they like it, passes up to their manager, and if they like it, they pass it up to their manager, and it's got to go up through the chain before it gets approval, and then it's slow coming back down for sign off, and by that stage, the horse is bolted, or you're basically comatose by the speed of it all. So decision making's got to be quick. You've got to be able to come up with an idea, and your manager needs to be able to go, yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea, and how are we going to implement it so we can deal with the risks associated with it? Let's do it. So this idea of being far more responsive, so that decision making is pushed down. So I know what's my scope of responsibility, and I've got control within that scope to make those decisions. Getting teams. Another way that innovation and continuous improvement is being promoted is making sure that there's less borders around teams. People are working less in silos, and we call this like cross-functional teams, so that you might have the health and safety people working with operational people working with administration people, so that we get all the views going through it. before we actually get into it and so forth, or whilst we're getting into it. And being able to make workplaces a lot more flexible and responsive by making rules and regulations less prescriptive and more guidance, so that people have a greater ability to work within that. And of course, just going back to what I was talking about earlier and through previous units, that all that requires trust. It requires really strong positive relationships, and it requires great communication. So if any of those things are missing, so if we don't have open and honest communication, or we have people who retain information and don't share it with other people, and you get all these barriers occurring, that's all going to really stifle the participation. It'll stifle the decision making, people taking ownership, and as a result, you're going to see, no one's going to come up with suggestions, because one, they're not being encouraged, and two, they're worried that they're going to get their backsides kicked if it doesn't go good. So this idea of making sure that things will go well because they've been there's a trusting and supported workplace with strong relationships is really critical. And that goes back to what we talked about at the last workshop around the idea of workplace relationships, and particularly around the idea of building trust and strong professional relationships. And within all this, if we're talking about people working together, bouncing ideas, providing role modeling and guidance, coaching and mentoring becomes critical. And I just want to quickly talk about the separation between the two. Coaching is is a directing role. If you're given the task of coaching me, that is because you know what you're doing. You're competent in what you're doing, and your job is to direct me on how to do it. So you say, Tony, I need you to do this, this, and this, and this. And I go, yeah, okay, great, I better follow that. And if I don't follow that, you have the authority to go, hey, I'm your coach. Do it as I said, or else you've got to give me 20 push-ups. And that's the role of the coach. It's very much a power relationship, where if the coachee doesn't do as the coach says, then the coach has got that power lever that they can pull. Mentoring is very different. That's an advisory type role. And there's less of a power imbalance in mentorship. So if you're mentoring somebody, they'll come to you for advice. Hey, Tony, I got this situation. What do you think? And I'll go, well, in my experience, when this happened, this is what I did. This is what happened. If I had to do it again, I would probably follow those same steps, and I'd probably do this a little bit differently. And then you'll go, okay, I can take that or leave that, use it as I will. So that's the difference between the two. So sometimes you're asked to coach people, and it's very much, okay, Tony, these are the steps you need to take. Let me show you how it's done. Now you have a go at it. Okay, that's good. All right, you're right to do that. Or yeah, you did steps 1, 2, and 3 right. I want to give you some feedback around 3 and 4. If you do it this way, you might get a different response. See how we go with that, and so forth and so forth. Whereas with mentorship, it's more an advisory role. People will come to you for just your experience and your advice on stuff. And we know from advice, people can take or leave it, as we do. So coaching becomes a really critical, important element to that. And we coach a lot. Coaching is one of the main ways that we shift information around the organization, around instructional information. Often we get buddied up with people, and we provide that coaching. All right, let's have a look at activities. Activity 2, 3, and 4. So I'll bring up the workbook, and we'll see if we can talk through that. Activity 2. Okay, so activity 2. Why should managers and leaders actively encourage and support team members to participate in decision-making processes and to assume responsibility and exercise initiative? Well, I gave you heaps of reasons before, but around it, it helps us to be engaged. It helps us to improve efficiency, effectiveness. It helps us to stay motivated in our role. It helps us to take ownership in what we're doing, and so forth. As a team leader, it is your responsibility to organize and run a morning meeting with the team to briefly go over the goals, tasks, priorities, and issues for the day. Attendance in the past week has been poor. So you send out an urgent email to the team asking for feedback on why they're not attending the meeting. You receive feedback from team members around the theme of not attending because meetings were unproductive. You want to encourage and support the team to take responsibility and show initiative, and you see this as a perfect opportunity to do that. How would you do that in this scenario? So have a think about how you would how you would encourage them to be able to take some responsibility and initiative around this. I talked briefly before about asking for input, about getting people's ideas and their suggestions into the decision making process. So that's really that's something for you to think about. That is something that's really critical whenever you want people to take responsibilities. They need to be part of the solution. If you tell me what to do without asking me or engaging me, I might do it, but I won't do it with any conviction. And the moment it goes wrong, I'll just say, well, it wasn't my idea. I didn't think it was ever going to work. But if you ask me, you say, hey Tony, I've got this issue. What do you think? What are your suggestions? Okay, well that's that. I like suggestion 1 and 3. They were really good. See if we can weave that in. You then have ownership in that part of that solution, because part of that is yours. So you've got a vested interest in making sure that it's successful. So you sort of you'll go a little bit an extra mile in terms of making sure it gets through, if that be the case. So there's some of the mechanisms. Critical to that is the idea of participation, asking, collaborating with people to make their voice and their ideas as part of the solutions. But it's also about asking feedback. It's about making sure that that we pull people aside, have those discussions, have a chat to them, building the trust, making sure that they have the confidence that any suggestions that they have, they're not going to be hung out to dry if it goes wrong. Activity 3. Why should managers and leaders communicate the organization's continuous improvement processes to individuals and teams? Well, if you or I don't know what the processes are, it'd be very difficult for us to engage in them. So we have no confidence in what we're doing is correct. We have no confidence if in terms of the support that management's going to give us, or how we can go about doing that. So I think it's really important for managers and leaders to be able to say to teams, this is, continuous improvement is really important. These are the reasons why, and this is how we want to do it. These are the processes by which, have an idea, have a think about it, come up with suggestions, come to me with your ideas and solutions, and so forth and so forth. Then it's much easier for us to participate in that. Activity 3.2, you have been promoted into the role of team leader. The previous team leader had a reputation for micromanaging the team. As a result, the team are conditioned to just do what they're told, as they're told, and when they're told. You want them to take on more autonomy by making decisions within their scope of responsibility and accountability. One area where you see great opportunity for this is in identifying opportunities for continuous improvement. You want them to identify areas where they see opportunity for improvement, do some analysis into the viability, and then, if viable, come up with suggestions on implementation. List 5 different approaches you could take to communicating these changes to teams and individuals. We've been talking about communication ad nauseum throughout this program, so hopefully you're already thinking of things like meetings, team meetings, one-on-one meetings, signage, notice boards, and there's a heap of other stuff that specific to different workplaces. Some workplaces you might have it on the agenda for your stand-ups or toolboxes. You might have something on the notice board. Other workplaces, they do things like I'll put messages on with if they're still doing pay slips, messages with their weekly or fortnightly pay slips and so forth. So there's a number of different ways you can do that. SharePoint, in some workplaces where they have an intranet site with a SharePoint, it's like a team homepage, intranet homepage. They'll put messages up on that. Some of the departments that I work in, the Commonwealth departments, will have monitors in the elevators that continually run different adverts for the department, and and so you might have like a little advert up there and so forth. So there's a number of different ways you can do that depending on your workplace and what's appropriate. Activity 4.1. Why should managers and leaders use mentoring and coaching to ensure that individuals are able to support the organization's continuous improvement processes? Well, we talked about the importance of mentoring and coaching, and I said that it is coaching in particular is the most predominant way in which we share directive information and organizational and instructional information. So that's really important. Why is it? Well, we've talked previously in the program. Coaching is the number one because it's instantaneous. It's low cost. Normally two people working together and say, hey Tony, can you coach this person on doing that task? It's pretty quick. And there's instant feedback. So you don't have to wait for someone to get back from a workshop, or you don't have to wait for them to get certified. In coaching, pretty much, two people get together, one person coaches the other, gives some feedback. They keep doing that loop until the other person's got it right, and the coach can sit there and watch them while they're doing it. So it's cheap, it's fast, it's responsive, it's relevant to the role, and it's instantaneous. 4.2. You have been promoted into the role of team leader. You want the team to take on more autonomy by making decisions within their scope of responsibility and accountability. John is having difficulty with making the transition from being directed to being delegated. He has 10 years experience in the role, and his performance records show that he has consistently met the roles and management's performance expectations. You think it's his lack of confidence that's a barrier. How can you use coaching and mentoring to support the transition for John? So you think about that. You think, John's actually, he's pretty experienced. He's got a great record. He just doesn't feel confident in being able to make decisions and take things for himself. How can I coach him through that? Maybe if I buddy him up with either myself or someone else, I can provide him feedback on all the positive things, be specific with my positive feedback so he knows what things he's doing really well, gives him the confidence to ask questions on the things that he's not sure about. That could be really powerful in terms of building up John's confidence over a quick period of time. Okay, folks, so if got that should fix that bit up. Let's have a look at the next slide. So if we were doing the workshop, I'd be showing you this this video series now. It's a 3-part series on this chap called Edwards Deming, W. Edwards Deming. Deming is often cited as the key player around the quality revolution or the continuous improvement emergence. If you watch this video, which I recommend, and I'll flick over to the workbook activity again. Let's have a look at this. If we have a look at the activity, on the activity you'll see that there's three, the links are there. So if you follow those links on YouTube, it'll take you to the 3 parts. They're about 9 minutes each, so all up you're looking at about 20 odd minutes for the video, the whole content. It's a really, I think it's really interesting, hence why it's been included in the assessment workbook. It's a really interesting breakdown of where continuous improvement has come from, what the quality revolution, where that has emerged from, and what are some of the key themes. Because if you understand the principles and themes behind continuous improvement, then you can interweave it or dovetail it into everything that you do work-wise, just like we do with safety. So safety is not an additional thing we do. So we don't go, okay, we've got to do this task. What do we have to do safety around it? We look at safety now as, okay, we've got a task to do. How do we do it in a safe manner? And continuous improvement is best applied when you understand the principles and you say, how do we continuously improve in everything that we do? It's not an additional thing. It's just always constantly thinking about how we can do things better. So have a look at this video and then undertake the activities. So the activities are broken up to be to coincide with the assessment part. So you'll see part 1 video. The video question is, what was the key message of Deming's work methods during the war effort? When you watch a video, you'll see that the key message is eliminate waste. So as you're watching the video, you can just jot that down. You don't have to, the key message was, you just make a bullet point, eliminate waste, just to sort of keep you focused on the key points in the video. And then there's a reflection. Where have you seen this applied in your workplace? How can this be applied in your workplace? And then it's just a matter of thinking, where have I seen that principle applied? So a very simple example would be, we no longer just single side print stuff. It's common practice in most workplaces now that you double side paper. Now, when you do your printing, double side it, so that way we don't waste it. And that's that idea of eliminating waste. So have a look through the video. I think it's a really good video, and it's really useful. If for whatever reason you don't have time, or you can't get access to the YouTube video, or you can't find it, whatever, I don't get too hung up on it. It's not a critical activity. It's something that's better suited to a workshop environment. But if you've got the time and you've got access to it, by all means, do yourself a favor and have a look at it. It's a pretty good vid, and it's, you know, Deming's passed away now, but he's got some really timeless views on just providing good quality across a range in this context, in the way that we work and manage our work, and it just gives some interesting context as well. So have a look at that video. Just before we go to activity 6, I just want to go to this slide, and I'll come back to 6. So one of the things that you would have picked up from the Deming method, this is when you watch the video, this will make a lot of sense to you, but one of the things that Deming took to Japan was the plan, do, check, act circle. And there's different variations. So it's like plan, implement, study, act. So sometimes the words may be different, but the activities are the same. Plan, do, check, act, or the PDCA circle, which is the basis of the continuous improvement philosophy. This idea that you find an activity, a work activity that you want to analyze. You review it. You see what's the process that we're currently following. Where can we look for efficiencies? And then we test it. And the do part of the cycle is the test. This is what we know. We know what we want to, how we want to rejig it. We know what kind of an outcome we want. We're going to implement the changes, and we're going to test it to see if it gets that outcome. And then once we've done the testing, we'll check what the results are. And then based on the results from the check, we're going to act in a sense of we're either going to make it permanent, or we're going to tweak it and have another go at it, or we're going to just scrap it and start again. And this continuous improvement cycle keeps going round and round and round. So when you watch the video and you look at the example from Ford Motor Vehicles, and the general manager of Ford talks about the gearboxes, this is what they're talking about. The difference between American gearboxes and the Japanese gearboxes in that period of time, and how they performed differently, was because the Japanese were saying, well, Japanese industry was saying, let's have a look at the way we do these gears in our gearboxes, the Toyota ones. Was it Toyota or Mazda? Anyway, one of them. Let's have a look at how we do the gears in the gearboxes. Okay, how are we making them? How are we assembling them? How are they operating? And they go through a process of analysis, and through that process of analysis, they look for efficiencies or ways that they can do it better. And this is the doing, they test it, the checking, they look at the results and act. And by the time they go through that process, it's probably been a year or two that it takes to go through that process, a year, two, maybe with some of these activities, maybe 3. By the time they're finished, they're already ready to start again. Okay, we've got it now, let's start looking at how we can even make it even better. So for some key activities of businesses, you're constantly going through this analysis process. And that's the PDCA circle, or the plan, do, check, act. And that's one of the key principles that underpin continuous improvement. So I just want to touch on that, because if we're in the workshop, we would have discussed this through the course of watching that video, and then go into activity 6. So let's look at activity 6 now, and I'll get the workbook up. You've just taken over the team leader's role for the receivables team. One of your focus areas is on fixing the problems with delivery shortages. The last stock take of the receivables area resulted in a large shortage of goods, which has been identified to sign in for items that have been invoiced but not received. The current process is as follows. The delivery driver arrives at the receivables door and rings the bell. The receivables team member opens the door and visually scans what is dropped off. The team member then looks to see if there is room in the warehouse to place a delivery. If there is room, they unload the delivery in the warehouse. If there is not enough room in the warehouse, they unload the delivery in the parking lot. The receivables team member then signs for the delivery driver then departs. Using lessons learned from Deming's model, processes and techniques, how would you approach improving the receivables process in this scenario? Consider any organizational systems or technology in your approach. So the key thing, so when you watch the video or videos, the key themes from Deming's are things like eliminate waste, about using statistics, about being clear on the process, and then working within that, the plan, do, check, act circle. So if we think about that, how would you use Deming's model? Well, some of the things that you may want to think about are things like, being clear on what the process is, making sure that you consult, because Deming talks a lot about asking the workers that actually do the work, making sure that you consult with the actual team to think about, identify ways that may be ineffective, identify any ideas that they may have for improvement, then about maybe testing it and seeing if it works, and then taking those results back to the team and asking. So, so when we talk about systems, it might be using things like spreadsheets, and this falls into the technology. You may want to gather data in terms of how long it takes you to receive goods versus how long it takes you to check for them, stuff like that, where you might want to get data to support whether changes have been worthwhile or not. I'll leave this one pretty open. The last activity, we're actually going to do more of Deming's application towards the end, but this is more just to sort of get you to think about some of those Deming principles that were in that video, the continuous improvement principles, and how you can apply those. So in video 3, for example, in that cluster of 3 videos, you'll see the Florida Power and Light Company. They talk about things like reducing dog bite accidents is about asking the meter readers, and they said having some type of record of which houses have bad dogs would really help us in preparing for it. So that's an example of consulting a worker. But then they talk about being able to use your equipment more efficient by having a look at which trees grow faster and making sure that they trim those trees more frequently than going to the sites and trimming trees that don't grow as fast. And that's looking at those growth rates. That's using technology. So think about how you would think, how you could apply that in this scenario. Let's go back to the slides. Okay, so this is the plan, do, check, act that I was just talking about earlier. Underpinning this framework are some key things, and you would have seen this in the video. Teamwork and involvement is critical. Communication is critical. Technology, and when we talk about technology, it's just making sure that we're using whatever technology is available to us. Process control, which is about knowing what steps go before what and what steps go after which. And then keeping track, which is about record keeping and reviewing. So let's just quickly break down these. Teamwork and involvement. Teamwork, continuous improvement is not driven by management, it's driven by the team. Very much like safety. Safety is not a management accountability, it's an everybody accountability. Continuous improvement is not an engineering accountability, it's everybody accountability. So when we talk about teamwork and involvement, everybody is responsible for it. Okay, so let me just illustrate an example here. So I'm just going to bring up, let me just bring this up. My great IT skills here. Terrific. Let me give you an example of what I mean about this, not an engineering accountability, but an everybody accountability. So let's just say we're making toasters, and this is the production line. This is our toaster, and this is the first part of the production line. Here on the production line, we get the metals. Sorry, I'm not very good with this. Metals, right? And that might be stainless steel, just steel, stainless steel, plastics, everything. And over here, so this is where we receive all these raw products. Here we get the electronics, like the elements and so forth. I don't know much about toasters, but you guys can follow where I'm going with this. The next part of the production line is we've got all the raw materials in. The next part of the production line is that we're going to create the frame. So you can just imagine that along the assembly line, on the conveyor belt, the goes along, and there's someone on the conveyor belt, and they're building the frames that go around, and we're imagining that it's still old school, that people are actually doing this instead of robots, but we're building the frames that go around. It's going to be the framework for the toaster, in which the casings will then be attached on. Actually, before the casings go on to the frame, we'll need to put on all those elements and the electrics that we identified before. So the frame goes along the conveyor belt, and the next team in the conveyor belt puts on those elements that heat our bread and whatnot. And then the toaster keeps going along the conveyor belt, and then the next team puts on the outside casings, and that might be some fancy stainless steel or something plastic. And then it keeps going along the conveyor belt, and then this team here might polish it, give it a clean. And then it keeps going along the conveyor belt, and then this team over here, oh geez, I'm getting pretty wobbly here. This team over here, they put it in the packaging. They take the polished toaster packaging, and they put it into the fancy box, and then it goes along the conveyor belt, and from the fancy box it goes onto the pallet, and then in the pallet it goes off to the warehouse for storage. And then from here it gets distributed out to the stores. So we'll call it point of sale, out in stores. And that could be anywhere. Could be Amazon these days, eBay, or a traditional bricks and mortar store. In the old days, you would have a quality control, a quality assurance or quality control team, depending on how it's set up in the organization, QA or QC, who would come to the warehouse, and they would pick a random number. So it might be 1%. So if we've got 1,000, we've got 1,000 toasters out of a particular, or say 10,000 of a particular brand out in the warehouse, they would pick 100 of them, and they would test them, and that's how they would do quality, and they would record how many are faulty. So, but the problem with that, and this is one of the things that Deming was saying, is that let's say that one of your suppliers, the suppliers that do the elements, is dodgy, and they send you dodgy elements. If you don't do quality along the cycle, and you send a dodgy element down the cycle, when it gets here, someone's going to build a frame, and that's cool, and the frame's going to be good. But when it gets here, and someone puts that dodgy element onto the toaster, you've created waste. You've created waste, and Deming says you created waste in materials, you create waste in man hours. You just create waste by putting bad product on good product. So you put a bad element on good metal casing, it makes the whole thing no longer any good. But it doesn't stop there. You got this faulty toaster that is never going to work, goes on to the next part of the assembly line, and then you've got people wasting their time and materials putting casings on a toaster that's never going to work. And then this faulty toaster just keeps going along the assembly line, and someone's going to polish a toaster that's never going to work. And onwards and onwards. And this is the traditional way that quality was done. And Deming and his colleagues at the time were saying that is ridiculous. It needs to be the responsibility of each team. Each quality control and quality assurance needs to come back to each point here. So this team here, they need to ensure that they need to be doing quality assurance and quality checking at each point, so that when they send product down the line, they're only sending quality product, not dodgy stuff, and vice versa. So, and continue on. So these guys here, this team here, they become quality officers. Everybody becomes a quality officer, checking quality before it sends through. So that way you're not creating waste. You're not creating waste in materials or people. And what you're doing is you're actually pushing responsibility and accountability back to the individuals doing the job. Just like we do with safety, it becomes everybody's responsibility. Quality is not just about an external team, it's everybody in the team. Well, maybe not the point of sale, because they're retailers, but everybody's responsibility within the team as to be quality officers. And that's, sorry about the crude illustration, but that's what we mean by this notion that everybody's got to be responsible for and accountable for quality. It's not just a separate team. So what does that mean? That means that you've got to get everybody involved. We know that I don't like to be told just do this. I'd like to know why do I have to do this? Why is it important? How do I contribute to that? How can I have buy-in on it? So this is critical to making sure that I'm, as a member of the team, I'm committed to continuous improvement. And of course, hand in glove with that is communication. If you don't know about what's going on, why we're doing stuff, who's involved, where do I get access to the info I need to do it, you're not going to get any of that teamwork or participation that I was just talking about. So both of those go hand in glove, and we've talked about these quite extensively through the program. So you've got to have good communication systems in place. Things like, we talked about team meetings, toolbox, one-on-ones. We need to have, like message boards, and they might be electronic, or they might be up in, the physical whiteboards up in the office. But these elements are critical. If we don't have them, we're really in strife trying to get people to participate. All right, let's have a look at activity 7. Why do team members need to know what the agreed outcomes and plans are? Who will do what, when, and how success will be measured? So we've got two elements there. Why is communication important? And we know that we need communication to be able to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we do it, and we need to be have that consultation and that buy-in process to that. But most importantly, we also need to know how our success will be measured, because if we're doing the job, we want to know what does a good job look like at the end, because that's what I'm striving towards. So if you can tell me what success looks like at the end and how it's going to be measured, then I can work to that. Computers, software. If you think about safety as an example of this, that transition from paper-based risk management systems to electronic management systems, that's a really good example of where we're using technology for continuous improvement. Ways of doing things that are more efficient, easier for us to collect data, for example, easier for us to be able to use that data. So then that leads into activity 8. Why collect and document work performance to identify opportunities for further improvement? Why is documentation important? Well, we know documentation's important. Collecting and documentation is important because it gives us, it gives us factual data that we talked about earlier. It gives us evidence going forward, so we can look at, what's our past performance, and then when we look at making changes and look at new performance, we can say what's our new performance. Documenting it also allows us to identify gaps from existing performance to where we should be at, and that can be at an individual or at a team level, and so forth. What are some of the ways that data on work performance can be collected? Well, performance data can be collected visually. So, I mean, we've talked about this previously. You can go around and look and see if things are done right or not. It can be done, you can collect data through facts and figures. So things like check sheets, having a sheet at a machine for people to log on when they've logged in and when they've logged out. When have I signed this piece of equipment out? When have I signed it back in? What was it used for? Those type of check sheets can be, that type of written collection of data can be really handy, or it can be done electronically. It can be done automatically where computer systems, for example, can collect data automatically. So, we may need to electronically scan in and out. So every time we go into a particular room or a depot, if we have to scan in and out, that somewhere in some computer system somewhere, they could, at a punch of a button, someone could see how often I've been there and what times I've been there. So we can collect data manually through observation, paperwork. We can collect it electronically through systems and computers and so forth. And also a big part of continuous improvement is this idea of process control. And process control is just knowing what steps occur in the way something is done. So a SOP, a safe operating procedure, or a standard operating procedure, is an excellent example of a process. If you pick up an SOP on how to perform a task, wash your hands, for example, it'll tell you the steps that you need to undertake in which to get the best outcome that is consistent with the organizational standards. And if there's any industry standards, they're normally consistent with that. I don't have to get into that too much. We talked a fair bit about safe operating procedures when we did the safety unit. I just want to do a little bit on flowcharts. So flowcharts, let me get this back up. Flowcharts, for those of you who are not familiar with them, are a great way in which to illustrate process. So a flowchart normally has one of these, which is called a terminator, and it starts off with a terminator. And then it has one of these, which is called a process box. Process box, which is a rectangle. And then it has one of these, which is a diamond, which is a decision. And then there's other ones, but these are the most common ones. So when I say other ones, there's things like, for example, one of these, it's a wavy bottom one. So it's a rectangle with a wavy bottom, which is a document. And I think these are on I should have this on a slide. So how does it work? So we've got the terminator, we've got the process box, and decision diamond. And okay, so let me show you a very simple one. So we start, this is just a start. So I'll do a terminator start. The diamond, just to illustrate the diamond has to be a yes or a no. You can only have two options, a yes or a no, because there's only two ways it can go. Well, in this case, I'm going to make this the yes, and in this case here, I'll make this one the no. So the question I'm going to put here is, do I want a coffee? Question. And there's only ever two options for this. There's only two options I'm allowing in this process. Is yes, I want a coffee, which in that case it might be get a coffee, buy a coffee, or get a coffee, or no, which is actually, if it's no, scrap that rectangle. I'm going to put another diamond in here. Do I want a T? And again, that's a yes or a no. And if it is, it's like get a T. If it's no, we're just gonna, I'm not gonna give any more. I'm not gonna make hot chocolates. We could do hot chocolates, we could do lattes or whatever we want to do, but let's just shorten this up and make it end. And then these ones, once you get your coffee, we're gonna take it straight to the end. So the flowchart is one of the tools that are used, and in this case I've done a really ridiculous simple one, but just to sort of show you how these symbols are used. It can show you, it can illustrate a process in a really simple manner, so that everyone, so if you go to McDonald's for example, there's a flowchart on how to flip the burgers. Well, this is a few years ago anyway. There's a flowchart on how to flip burgers or cook fries or clean the toilets, so that anybody can pick it up and just follow this step, this step, this step. And if there are alternatives, they can go through this decision diamonds and continually flow. So it's a really great way in which to articulate a process. In continuous improvement are used for process identification, but they're also used as an analytical tool. So if you have a process that's not working so well, flowcharts are a terrific way where you get the team together, everyone who's doing the process, and say, okay, let's all sit down and let's describe in a flowchart how we're actually doing this task, because it helps you to identify where there's confusion about, where there's disagreement on what steps should go after what, or to help you to identify if there's any unnecessary steps or any ineffective steps within it. And it's not about, you don't say to the team, let's flowchart how we should be doing it. You actually say to the team, and you're part of that team, saying, how are we actually doing it? And that's where you get to find out whether there's inconsistencies and so forth. And then you talk about how you can improve that flowchart or that process, and then you can flowchart it to see that it works. So it can be a terrific tool in terms of continuous improvement, in terms of getting a grip on whatever the process is. And here's those symbols I was talking about before. So that's the terminator, which is the starter end, the arrows, which show the direction. Inputs and outputs is, you use that one when there's, say, a system, you have to have an input or an output, you would use that. You don't see that, that's not so common. The process box and the decision ones are the other ones that are really, these two are the most common ones. Process box means that a step needs to be taken. A diamond means that a decision needs to be taken, and that decision has got to be yes or no. So for example, not that you would see this, but let's just say for example, just for giggles, you would, this is our coffee one, and we want to say, do we want sugar? And the answer is yes. And you'd have to then go, do you want one sugar? And if the answer, if say you want 3 sugars, then you would have to go no, and then it's like, do you want another diamond? Do you want 2 sugars? No, another diamond. Do you want 3 sugars? And eventually you get to yes, where it then goes, put in the sugar. So you don't see that. You know, it would be really ineffective to have that in a flowchart. You'd probably just put a process box and say, if do you want diamond, say do you want sugar, and if it's yes, put in a process box to say put in the desired amount of sugar. But just to, so just give you that example though, to illustrate how it can only be a yes or a no decision on it, or else it doesn't work. And of course we should be keeping, as I said before, we need to be keeping records. Any work we do on continuous improvement, we should be keeping records, because that's how we track the data. And we've talked about this in previous units, but you know, you keep a record of any changes that you've made, any decisions that have been made, any future reviews that need to be done, just like we do with safety. The same type of thing with continuous improvement. Activity 9, explain the importance of maintaining accurate records of organization improvement initiatives. Pretty much what I just said then. And just being aware that continuous improvement, you know, is a commitment that everybody needs to have. It doesn't work. It's just like safety. If you've got the team committed to continuous improvement and management not, then then it's not going to work. So the way to get everybody committed to it is just making sure that it's not an additional thing that we do, it's part of everything that we do. So just like I said earlier, safety, we don't think about tasks and then safety, we think about just doing jobs or tasks safely. Continuous improvement is the same way. We just think about how can we do this most effectively, are there ways that we can improve, and this idea of just not sitting back on our laurels and going, yeah, it's fine, because it may be fine today, but it may not be fine tomorrow. And some of these continuous improvement initiatives, you have to start thinking ahead of time. So I gave the example of the iPhones at the start of this video. They release one iPhone, they're already working on the next one before they even release the current one. That's how far in advance the curve is actually that broad, that you've got to start really early. So just the final project. So the final project was that you read the scenario and then you come up with a continuous improvement. And you can still do this. I've got in the activity, I'm just going to get up the workbook. In the workbook activity, I say in groups. If you're still if you're still in around others within the workshop, you can still do this in groups. But you can, if you're not, you just work on this in isolation. You can just do this on your own. But this is a scenario. A close friend of yours has just purchased a busy bakery and coffee shop located in the city. They're struggling with poor service reviews online. In particular, people are commenting on the long queues at the counter. They have asked for your advice in improving the service. You decide to observe the operation, and this is what you find is happening at the counter. When a customer enters the bakery, they approach the counter. The only menu they have is displayed above the counter. It's an extensive menu with well over 50 food items available. The staff member working at the counter takes the order, collects payment, and then starts to fill the order. If the items ordered do not require preparation, the counter person assembles and serves the customer immediately while they stand at the counter. If, however, the order requires preparation, the customer's name is taken and the customer waits whilst the staff member prepares their order. If the order has required preparation, once the order is ready, the customer's name is called, the order is handed over, and then the staff member serves the next customer. At any time of the day, there may be several service personnel working at the front counter. So you see that and you think, okay, what's my task? Your task is to identify the current process and perform an analysis. So see if you can flowchart that. Don't have to be too sophisticated. Just get the main stuff down of how is the current process for ordering occurring. Put it in a flowchart and looking from that flowchart, see if you can come up with some suggestions on how to improve it, and then put in the new flowchart. And that'll give you a really good visual description of the ineffective current one, and then how your new effective one will go about. And then once you've identified the current flow, made some suggestions, and put it into the new one, then just outline how you would involve the team in the continuous improvement approach. So how would you get the team involved? Would you have a meeting, get everyone involved, flowchart the current process with them together, come up with suggestions together, think about the new one, how you're going to test it, make sure everybody has buy-in on how we're going to test it, what's the data that we're going to gather to see whether we've improved, and so forth. So you might do a team meeting, you might send out an email, circulate the minutes so those people who couldn't make it still knows what's going on. You might do a follow-up one-on-one, catch up with people. Outline how you would communicate the changes to the team. So are you going to put up a plan? You're going to send out, as I just said, an email, do one-on-one follow-ups to make sure everybody understands what the changes are and how they're going to be implemented. You're going to do any signage maybe. Describe how you would deal with any resistance or concerns about the change. This is not really a big part of the unit, but just in the context. How would you deal with any resistance? Like if anyone says, no, I don't like it, what are you going to do? You're going to talk to them more about it, make sure that they've got the information, give them the opportunity to buy into the decision making, and so forth. And that's pretty much it. It's really just looking at applying the key characteristics of the continuous improvement cycle. So these are the three outcomes: contribute to continuous improvement systems and processes, monitor and report specified outcomes, and support opportunities for further improvements. Good luck, folks. As usual, if you have any questions or queries, pop me an email, pick up the phone, or send me a courier pigeon. But that should be fairly straightforward. All right. Thank you.